Well, in today's reading, we're reminded that Joshua has died, and all that generation that truly knew the Lord and served the Lord with Joshua has died as well. We see that in Judges chapter 2 and verse 10. And now a new generation who did not know the Lord, who did not know his works, has arisen in Israel. And we need to remember that, because there's a danger that the very next generation can be a generation that does not know the Lord. And it should drive us as Christians in churches to share the gospel and to make disciples so the next generation knows the Lord. But Judges highlights the Israelites. He highlights their abandoning God and living for self. And we see this through what we call the cycle of sin. That cycle of sin is first described in chapter 2, and then we see it played out with each of the judges that comes about. And so I wanted to highlight that cycle of sin. I want us to look at Judges 3, verse 7 through 11 today. Judges 3, beginning in verse 7. The Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight. They forgot the Lord their God and worshiped the Baals and the Asherahs. The Lord's anger burned against Israel, and he sold them to King Cushan-Rishathaim and Aram-Naharaim, and the Israelites served him 8 years. The Israelites cried out to the Lord, so the Lord raised up Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, as a deliverer to save the Israelites. And the Spirit of the Lord came on him, and he judged Israel. Othniel went out to battle, and the Lord handed over King Cushan-Rishathaim of Aram to him, so that Othniel overpowered him. Then the land had peace for 40 years, and Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. Now, when we read the book of Judges, the term judge is not what you and I think of as someone who sits and just judges like court cases, but a judge would be one that was that would rise up and lead the people, and making those type of decisions was part of it, but it was more like a political military leader. And so here we see the cycle of sin, and the cycle of sin is we see where sin, the Israelites sin in verse 7, that they did what was evil in the Lord's sight. And then they began to suffer in verse 8. Verse 8, that they were sold into bondage. And then after they suffered for a while, they cried out to the Lord in verse 9. And in verse 9 and 10, God sends a deliverer, Othniel, to deliver them. And finally, the cycle ends in verse 11, where the land had peace for 40 years. And so there's 5 parts to the cycle of sin. There's sin, suffering, crying out, deliverance, and peace. And Israel kept repeating this cycle. So why? Why did they go through this cycle? Why did they repeat it? Because they served themselves. They looked at themselves as their own master. They wanted to live for themselves, do what they wanted to do. Instead, what they needed to do is to surrender to the Lord and to make him the Lord of their life. And if we're going to break the cycle of sin in our life, then that's what it's going to take, that he has got to be Lord of our life. We've got to turn from ourselves and surrender to him. Well, I hope you'll join me again next time as we continue in Judges.